We are here in the King's Forge and about to hammer out another topic. So tonight we're going to discuss, Summer, this new trend. I don't know how new it actually is, but it seems to be increasing. Let's put it that way. In our circles and in our modern American culture, there seems to be an ever increasing and growing anti-Christian sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere you turn, I see these videos on TikTok and YouTube and all these different platforms. And I see these people that are, for whatever reason, they keep rebelling against Christianity, this or Christianity, that. And some of them, I don't think they completely understand even what they're trying to rebel against. They don't, it's to me, it seems like they don't understand Christianity. And what's even more interesting than that is I hear some of these people trying to defend their stance or defend their belief in Christianity. And it seems that they don't really quite understand. And I'm amazed by this phenomena. I watch it. And I watched one recently where this young man was asking a question about, his statement was, and I'm going to paraphrase because I certainly can't quote it exactly, but his whole thought process was, I didn't ask to be created. None of us really did. And he thought it seemed very unreasonable and quite unfair that there's this God that created everything and then said, if you don't love me and have a relationship with me, then I'm going to send you to hell.
Mm.
And that was his concept, his understanding of Christianity. And I thought to myself, how skewed that is. Because that's not the reality of the situation at all. The reality of the situation is that, yes, from our viewpoint, we do believe that God exists. We do believe that God created everything that is, including us.
Mm-hmm.
But then God said, there's no alternative. I'm God, and there's nothing else. And I do have an adversary.
Mm.
And I want to love you, and I want to develop a relationship with you, and I want to show you and grow you into what an ultimate destiny that you have yet to fulfill. Just like a parent with an earthly child, I mean, a mortal parent with a child. And if you trust me and work with me, and don't rebel against me, I'm going to show you a lot of things. I'm going to teach you a lot of things. But if you reject me, you're going to wind up in an eternity without me, without my power, without my influence, without my love. And, God is love, and everybody talks about God is the source of love. So if God is love and God is the source of love, then you're going to end up in a situation eventually that has no love, no mercy, no salvation, no compassion. That's, that's the parts of the, I'll say, unspoken attributes of hell. People talk about spoken attributes, weeping, gnashing of teeth, and hell fire, and blah, blah, blah. We hear all that all the time. But most people never wrap their head around the fact that, if there is, in fact, a God, for those people that are questioning, and God has created us, that all he's doing is saying, listen, I've created you. You don't have my intellect. You don't have my experience. You don't have my wisdom, but I can teach you.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason he's given us free will, okay, because he did not want automatons. God loves and wants to be loved, and you cannot have love without free will choice. Otherwise, you have slavery.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And so part of the whole point of this whole thing is to love and be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like his understanding, at least this gentleman that I'm talking about, referring to, is completely devoid of that entire concept.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, he has developed this perception that Christianity and this whole premise is completely unfair, is completely oppressive, and you're going to get punished if you don't just bow down and obey.
Mhm.
Um, and I wonder how many people have that same understanding, and that's what they think they're rebelling against, and they really don't understand exactly what Christianity actually is, nor the relationship that we speak of when we talk about relationship with God. So
Mhm.
I give it to you to throw back. So
Well, that concept isn't new, and what one thought that I have about that is that this individual that you're referring to may be grasping upon an idea that he has heard from someone else speak, because and this is why I say that is I was watching a TV show and they introduced a God character, our Judeo-Christian God. But by the end, they made him out to be someone who was just seeking love and demanding love and wanting everyone to love him. That's literally how they portrayed God. And so sometimes I believe, and probably not everyone, every atheist or anyone who has rejected God feels this way, but sometimes I think that some people will grab on to an ideal of who God is in a negative light because it gives them a sort of surface level peace of mind. And so, well, if I can just make God into this narcissistic person, then that gives me the right or the understandability that I don't have to love him. Well, he's a narcissist. Why would I? If I can believe that he's only there just for love and he's going to punish me if I don't love him, and I can put him into this box that makes him into a narcissistic abuser of his creation, then I don't have to love him. And that doesn't make sense anyway. So I don't have to. I can just push that aside. And then there's also that Satan, the evil that works within people that they they don't even realize is happening, because as you and I have mentioned before and we've talked about before, truly it does come down to the fact, as human beings, ultimately we don't even have a choice, because God is God and he is our creator, period. But because God is so loving, he gave us a choice. But we understand that to be, since he is our creator, we can either choose him or not choose him. As where others don't choose him, then what are they choosing? But they're going off the other side. They're going towards the evil side. And so then that allows Satan to come in and mess with their mind and convince them of terrible things about God, terrible things about Christ, and or even skewing the truth a little bit to fit any sort of narrative that will keep a person away from God. And then they'll believe that because it's easier and it seems more common, and it gives them that surface peace of mind that, well, I don't have to love God because this reason. Well, I think God is this, and that makes me happy.
I kind of get that, but still, to me, it just seems very odd. It's an odd place to argue from. Going referencing this conversation that I started with, um, this guy's making this case. Um, this we didn't ask to be created.
Mhm.
Okay, well, let's take that down a notch from creator God to mom and dad.
Mhm.
Okay, you didn't ask to be born. Okay, mom and dad were involved in that. Okay, so now your dad says, or your mom says, do this, do that, do this, and don't do this and don't do that. And then you rebel and do the opposite and you get punished for it. Now, do you hate your mom? Mom said I wasn't supposed to play in the street, and I went out in the street anyway, but then she whipped me for that.
Yeah.
Can you believe that? I got grounded for that. And I hate, that's not fair. I mean,
But there's many children who feel that way.
well, and that's the thing. It's a child. The argument is rooted in the mind. It's a childish argument.
Yes.
And that's what gets me. It's not an argument from some sense of maturity. It's an argument that stems from the impetuousness of youthful misunderstanding. And that's the point that I'm making. And I'm like going, I don't think you really understand what it is you're arguing against. And you obviously feel that you do, just like every other kid and teenager that argues with their mother and father. And there are mistakes as far as on the human level. There are some times that your mother or your father may advise you in the wrong way. That's possible because we're all human. But when we flip that script now, okay, and there are sometimes, let's face it, there's some people that are absolutely wonderful parents. Some people, not so.
Yes.
Whether because they're caught up in some sort of addiction, or whether there's some underlying mental condition going on that has a negative impact on their parenting or whatever. There's a whole lot of, things going on there. However, with God, you have to understand that God is a sovereign entity, and all that exists because of God. Now, also from the Christian perspective, we have this adversary, this personality we call Satan. And the word tells us that he was angelic, he was an angel, and that he rebelled against God. He wants to be worshiped as God. Okay. So he wants to usurp that authority, or at least to steal God's recognition. He wants it for himself. I want to be worshiped, not him. I want to be worshiped. I want to sit in that same throne. And yet he can't. He's not omnipresent. He's not omnipotent, and he does not have the attributes of God. Now, he is angelic, and the Bible tells us that. And so what he does is he tries to get mankind to fall into worship of him in one way or another. And he does this, interestingly enough, he does this by mimicking and twisting what God does.
Yes, exactly.
And I don't think most people know that. I don't think most people, and maybe I'm naive, but it seems like when I talk to many people, and and I'm 55 years old now, that even today I talk to a lot of people who have been Christians for years. Now, if you're a new Christian, you didn't grow up in a Christian household, I expect you to say, man, I've got a lot of things I need to figure out. I get that. But if you claim to grow up in a Christian household and you're 40 years old, I would expect that you would understand at least a great deal of these things because you've been exposed to it for 40 years. And I find that people aren't. And it's disturbing to me. I mean, that's a sad commentary on our churches and the way that we teach and edify the people. We're not doing a great job if that's our track record.
Well, there was about 20 years past in the church where it started, I believe it started in the 90s. And that's when we started to lose our generation, Gen X, and then the millennials. And it wasn't until like the 2010s when the church was like, oh my gosh, wait a minute. Let's start trying to get back the millennials. And now they're doing many ministries for the Gen Z, and they're trying to build back up. What happened in the 90s with the church was it became more of a seeker friendly church, which is great on the surface, but when you have a church that is strictly geared towards pleasing the eyes, the ears, the heart, and evangelism more so than discipleship, that's when you begin to lose the depth and the roots and the traditions. It started in the 90s. Tradition wasn't the best. It wasn't great. No one really liked it. And that's when you started seeing the rise of the mega churches and the smoke machines in the sanctuary, and some of that is okay, like the screens in the sanctuary, modern music, as long as it's biblical, that's fine. The worship wars, that was the era of the worship wars when people were arguing hymns versus contemporary Christian music. And when the church was in those divisive conversations and trying to reach out more or be friendly to people who weren't raised in church, I think that's when we started losing some of our discipleship. And we didn't really see that at the time. Because if we go back even further, what we see is a church that was rooted in tradition, a church that was very tradition based, wanting to dig deep into discipleship. The Jesus movement of the 70s, when the hippies were like many of them, not all of them, but the ones who did give up their sinful lifestyles and wanted to just be a part of the church. And it was a revolution in the whole country and wanted to dive deep into discipleship. And then you had the Reagan Christians of the 80s and that deep tradition and discipleship. We started losing some of the evangelism then. And so it's like a pendulum swinging. And so now what we have is boomers, the boomer generation, entrenched in tradition of the church. And then you don't have many Gen X people in the church. You have some, but not many at all, millennials in the church. But you're starting to see some of the Gen X, the college age, early 20s, they're coming back to the church. And so I'm hoping that the church will kind of
You mean
find
the
a
Gen
balance.
Zs or
What?
millennials? You mean Gen Z or millennials, or I don't think
Gen
you meant
Z.
Gen X. Yeah, you said Gen X, so I was just clarifying.
Well, the Gen X would be those of the 90s who were kind of more seeker friendly, trying to not wanting to not give into to tradition too much. And I believe the church lost a lot of people.
Well, and here's the thing. I think there's you're bringing up a lot of interesting points, but I think that some of the problems actually started much earlier. Um, for instance, um, there have been, or it has been, a steady increase in single parent family homes, an increase in the rate of divorce, an increase in teen depression and suicide numbers, um, an increase in a lot of societal issues that have
Mhm.
been on the steady increase since specifically 1963.
Yeah, you're very right about that.
And
Yes.
you know what happened in 1963? That's the year they took prayer out of school.
Mm, yeah.
And so now you had, because before that, you were at least exposed to the concept of supplication to a deity in the public school system. Well, if you remove
Morality.
that, if you remove that,
Mhm.
and now you have this moment of silence or whatever, and I don't even know if they do that anymore. Where it's not a corporate prayer or anything anymore.
Mhm.
Then all that starts to begins to erode. And then you had an increase in in a decline, I should say, in church attendance. Church attendance started to fall, and it was small incrementally at first, and then
Mm-hmm.
it got broader and broader and broader. And so what happened in the 60s and 70s, you started seeing a lot of, like you were talking about, these people, this Jesus movement coming about. But what you started seeing also is a lot of the traditional houses of worship were starting to decline to a degree.
Yes.
And this Jesus movement sort of went outside the walls of the houses of worship, which
Exactly.
it was not necessarily a bad idea.
No, it was wonderful.
Um, but then what happens in the 80s is when those sorts of things needed to be, they lost the house of worship feel, because they didn't root themselves in that, and so they lost that sort of background, and so they didn't have that to fall back on when they needed to say, you know what, I'm starting to get burned out, I'm starting to get exhausted, I need to be refreshed. And the churches were dwindling, and the churches were not refreshing those people like
Exactly.
we needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
um, and more people started to decline church attendance, and from that moment on, I think from specifically from the 80s, is assuredly church attendance has been steadily in decline, primarily among men. I mean, women, go to most churches and you're going to find, oddly enough, I think this is starting to change, I hope it is, but you're going to see more women go than men.
Yeah.
You'll see. I mean, I remember back in the 80s and 90s when women went to church and their husbands stayed at home,
Yeah.
which is an odd dynamic, because if the husband has that traditional role as the leader of the house, um, and so what's happening is these men have given up their spiritual leadership, and now their families and wives are being led to and fro and by every whim, because they're absent, because a lot of people don't like the traditional. And that's the other thing I was going to talk about. We just sort of branched right into that naturally. This whole thing, the reason I'm having this conversation is because it feels like people are trying to attempt to cancel Christianity. And one of these factors that the traditional Christian, um, the way people view the Christian marriage, Christian relationship, sort of husband and leadership role. I don't know how many people think that means, well, the husband's supposed to be dominant over the wife, but that's the way they understand it. I'm like, no, that's not what the Bible teaches at all. The
And that's what
Bible,
society tells
I
people that
know
the Bible
that's
says.
it's such a weird piece of misinformation, though, because
Mhm.
if you take those scriptures that they're referring to, and it does say, wives, obey your husbands, and it does say all that.
Yeah.
But then if you read just beyond that, it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church,
Yes.
that he be willing to give his life for her. And most people don't understand every aspect of what it means to give your life for your wife and your house and your family. It doesn't mean to die.
Mm-mm.
It means to set aside your agenda
Mhm.
for your wife and family's agenda. They come first.
Yep.
And when it says you are the head of your household spiritually, you are the head minister. You are the head attendee or attendant to their needs, right?
Yeah.
And when you really understand that, that's what Christianity is saying. That's what the Bible professes, is that men should be attending to the needs of their wives, and to, from that point, the needs of their children, and they should be doing those things to make sure that they have everything that they need. And that could be all kinds of things, not just necessarily material possessions, you know
Mhm.
emotional support, educational support, yes, food and shelter and all that sort of things that we need, all of that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other end of that spectrum is they say, well, then man's the only one that's supposed to supply that. No, not necessarily. If a man can make enough money to do that, and he and his wife converse together and they say, you know what, I can do this and let's do it this way, then okay, you've made this
Mm-hmm.
decision together. But you need to understand that you're a team. And so you both set the goals. This is not it's not a dictatorship like people think, some authoritarian, woman, you be quiet and do exactly what I say, and this is the way it's going to be. And that's not that at all.
Mm-mm.
It's a mutual, loving, respectful decision making between the two of us, where we both set aside our selfish desires so that we can accomplish life together, and that we can love and grow in our love for each other. And that now it's, it's the world against me and mine. And I don't mean that in a bad context, because everything can be spin. Like I mentioned before, Satan tries to spin everything God does to the negative. He tries to
Mm-hmm.
twist it all. But when I'm standing firm with my wife, I've got her back, she's got my back. You're not going to crack that, as long as
Right.
we are safeguarding each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's when one of us turns away from the other and puts the kink in the armor, or the drop in protection, that's when everything starts to stick in, and that's when everything starts to get destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What people will talk about Proverbs 31, and there's even a company called Proverbs 31. And to be the Proverbs 31 wife, if you actually fully read that text, it talks about a woman who makes good business decisions, a woman who provides for her family, a woman who is loving and nurturing to her family. And so when you have people who have that concept of a wife is just to be submissive to the husband to the point where she is at home and does all the chores of maintaining the house and taking care of the kids, and they cannot make decisions. And there are Christians who truly do believe this. They are not reading Proverbs 31 themselves, because that is not a Proverbs 31 wife. Is a wife who is 100% submissive to her husband, as some people have said. And I do believe society, not just the church, but there's people far outside of the church who have been influenced by Satan, who will say, well, that's what the church believes. The church believes the woman can't do anything, and will put that into people's minds. But you described it perfectly, what Paul was saying about when Paul was the one who said wives should be submissive to their husbands. It does not stop there. It goes on to how a husband is to be sacrificial to his wife and willing to lay down his wants and his personal ambitions for the sake of his family, and want to do what is best for the family whole as a unit, and lead the family as a unit. And I've heard women say this, and this is true. When you have a husband who is got your best interest in heart and wants to do the best for you and your family, and you feel supported, as I feel supported by my husband, when I feel supported and loved and taken care of, I am much more willing and even able, and I want him to make the decisions because I trust his leadership. I trust him to provide. I trust him to be there and be supportive, and I want to be supportive of him because we are a team. So, like you're talking about how you and your wife, when you support one another, nobody can break that. Well, that's how that bond is built.
There's a fascinating book that I read, and I can't remember the name of the author, but I'm pretty sure the name of the title of the book was Love and Respect in Marriage. And it details something that is very profound and very, very true. And it's about the innate, one of the innate differences between men and women. Okay. Women desire to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's this innate thing. It's a characteristic that most of them share. Now, of course, everybody's an individual, so it varies but by and large, women want to feel loved. They desire that. And when you feel loved, then everything else can be going wrong. But when you feel loved, you can make it right.
Yeah.
So there's your aspect of femininity. Okay. So the masculinity, men don't desire to be loved. This is one of the most things. Men desire to be honored. A man will die for honor. A man will go to war for honor. A man will fight fiercely for honor. And so if a woman gives her husband honor, that's just as fueling and fulfilling for him as him giving her the love she needs. And so this is one of the things that if I counsel couples, I tell them all the time, the ladies, you may be as angry with your husband that you could chew rocks. Never, never, ever voice that in public.
For real.
At
Oh my God.
home, at home, you could discuss whatever you need to and get everything out on the table between the two of you. Be
Mm-hmm.
fully open and honest with each other, but never dress him down. Don't ever dishonor him in public. If you do, you are building the terms of your divorce from the moment you start. You are going to ruin your marriage. You're not going to help it. You're not going to win your case. You're going to destroy everything you're trying to work to save. You
Mm-hmm.
will. And same way with men. Never, never do anything or put your wife in any position or say anything that's going to make your wife feel like you don't love her.
Mm.
Even if you're angry and upset with something she did or said, what are you doing? We can't afford to buy 3 dogs. I mean, you came home with puppies for the kids, and I mean, 1 puppy, we have 3 kids. They don't all need an individual dog. And you went off and you might be just fuming like, how in the world am I going to, do this? We got to rectify this situation. We can't buy food and supplies for 3 puppies. But you always make her feel like you're still, communicate that in a way that she knows, you know what, maybe I did overstep the bounds, but he loves me anyway. And he understood what I was trying to do, and we can work together to make this work. One way or
Mm-hmm.
the other, we're going to come out of this. Um, but yeah, I wish I could remember the author of that, um, but for those people listening, if you're having an issue in your own marriage and it's a great book. It's a great resource. Look for it in any Christian bookstore. I'm sure you'll find it. Get it. It's invaluable resource. It's great. Um, Now on this whole thing about feeling like Christianity is that the opposition is trying to cancel Christianity. I mean, that's what it feels like. And I get
Mm-hmm.
this from a lot of people that are Christians today. They feel attacked. Um, they feel like not only, I mean, their values are attacked, their beliefs are attacked, their even all the way down to their self-worth as being a Christian, which is interesting because the scriptures actually tell us that this is going to happen, that
Yeah.
people are going to hate us just simply because we're Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I was going to get to is that one argument I often hear against people who they perceive to be coming at them from a Christian's perspective, all right, be over what it is, no matter what the issue is, they think, well, you're trying to come at me like a Christian. They say, you can't judge me. And I don't think people quite understand that either. Um, First off, and if all of our listeners that are listening to this right now, I want you to really hear this, and I want you to really consider what I'm about to say here. Think very carefully. Um, we cannot define sin. There's not one person that if I asked, I need to know the exact weight of sin, you couldn't tell me how much it weighed. I need to know the exact color, hue, and opacity of it. You don't know what color it is. I need to know how much postage it's going to take to mail all the sin in the world. See what I'm saying? There's no parameter. You can't see it. You can't touch it. You can't taste it. The only thing that we can do is identify it. And the only reason we can identify it is because God qualifies it in his word. God determines what is and what isn't sin. He defines it. We don't define it. All we can do is identify it when we see it. So when we come up to somebody and we're concerned because we think we see sin in somebody, what most people don't understand is where we're coming from. Because the place that from my Christian convictions and beliefs and understanding, where I'm coming from is if I see you about to walk into a building that I know is on fire and is about to fall in and you can't tell it, I don't want you to go in there. I care too much about you to see you get injured and possibly killed in a fire or horribly burned. I don't
Mhm.
want that for you. So I'm going to stop you from going in there. Well, if I think that you're going to be doing something that's going to cause you to distance yourself from God and die in that state and spend an eternity separated from God and his love and his mercy and his forgiveness and all of the beautiful things that we talk about when we talk about God and heaven and eternity. I don't want that for you.
Mhm.
I'm not trying to rule your life. I'm trying to tell you I love you so much that I'm concerned, and you retaliate and respond to me with vehement anger at my love. Now, I will preface this. There are times we go about that wrong in our
Mhm.
zeal. Sometimes we come across and I understand why people feel that we're being judgmental rather than being identifying. I get it. I get it. We have a lot of work to do too because we're not perfect. But I think that needs to be said in such a way that people start to realize, this is from the Christian perspective, this is what's happening. And I don't know that we say that enough into the ether that people say, okay, now wait a minute, maybe I'm being a little too harsh. Maybe I'm being too quick to judge Christians and where they're coming from and why. Because they're coming from a place of concern and ultimately love. So what do you say about that?
Again, maybe it because I can be cynical about
No.
about the world and the church. I can be cynical about both. And sometimes, and I've said it before on this podcast right here, rewind. And I think a lot of it is Satan putting an idea in society, and people will latch on to that idea and hear it from somebody, will hear it from someone else, and like, hey, they're right because Christianity can't be right. So I'm going to cling to this idea because it gives me peace and it gives me a community and it gives me a cynical kind of joy to believe that the people over here at the church are judgmental or to believe that God hates me because of what I've done. It makes me feel better in a way to know that there are others who reject God. And so I just have that idea that people want to reject God so that they will find a way to do so. They'll find a way to believe that the church is being judgmental. on the flip side of that, I also believe that there are church people who are very judgmental, even if they say they're not, who have a negative impression of people on the outside, even if they don't want to and say that they don't. Maybe they have been hurt. You said it before that many Christians feel as though they are being attacked. Our beliefs are being attacked. And some Christians feel like they've been backed into a corner, that their beliefs are so much under attack. And in America, we're not persecuted, but our beliefs are. I mean, we do have to admit that. And so many Christians feel like they're backed into a corner. So what do you do when you're backed into a corner, but you're going to fight back? And so you just have these two groups that are constantly fighting at each other. The group that rejecting God and the group that feel like they're back into a corner and have to defend God and have to defend their way of life and defend God's laws. And then you have Christians like me and you who are just, here's the truth. This is what's really going on. This is who God really is. And sometimes I don't believe that our voices are heard, that the truth of God's love and mercy, because of his laws and his judgment, that's what we're trying to preach. He has love and mercy because he has laws and because he is the judge. People don't like that Andor. People just want it to be their way, over here or over here, not
Well,
in the
yeah,
middle.
and and nobody's. I don't think anybody's ever said this out loud. Uh, in a at least nobody that I've ever heard. But what most people don't understand is when you see all this, like, okay, back in the 80s, right? You had all the hard rock sort of heavy metal stuff going on. I mean, and I was a hard rock heavy metal fan, okay? But I was also at that time listening to a lot of Christian metal. I still do. I mean, I'm a Striper fan, have been since the 80s, still
Petra.
still have, and still listen to Striper CDs and all that kind of stuff, and still listen to that kind of stuff, Disciple and all those guys.
Oh, I love Disciple.
And so I did like the edgier music and style, but then you had a whole lot of that has this sort of satanic overtones to it, right?
Yeah.
Whether completely overtly or subtle. All right, it was all through there, and that's why you had all these things in the '80s with the people, the album covers, and all this controversy and stuff, and it just it got way out of hand.
Yeah.
I don't think you see all these people out here, these that is as offensive to a Christian
Yes. Yes.
as swastika flags are to Jewish people,
Yeah.
as racial slurs are to African American people,
Mm-hmm.
to all these things. It's like that is so wrong. That is offensive to us as it is to the thing about it is we don't throw stones at it. We don't get angry about if that's what you're choosing to display. We try to talk to you about it and say it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
And we try to handle it most of the time. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody out there that's probably flipped his lid,
I've heard
and
quite a few.
probably done or said the wrong thing the wrong way. I mean,
Mhm.
we're human beings, um, but I don't think most people realize how offensive that is. And I find it interesting because I see a lot of this in today's entertainment society. There's a whole lot of satanic imagery and this, that, and the other, and blah blah blah
Oh
blah,
yeah.
and there's a lot of it. And these same people would never, um, they would never have a group of background dancers in the back that were all people of color, dressed in slave costumes, dancing with leg irons and shackles while somebody was whipping them. They wouldn't do that.
No,
They
no.
was like, that's so offensive, that's so wrong, and it is. I mean, that would be abhorrent. And they don't view this the same way. And it's kind of a double standard to a degree, but so it's one of these, it's this situation where it's like, there's, I guess what I'm trying to outline maybe is that there seems to be some sort of disconnect, because they're like, well, yes, but this over here was like some sort of spiritual or I mean, physical thing that happened. And you're talking about some sort of spiritual thing that may be bogus.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the disconnect, and they don't realize that while some people choose to say, I don't believe there's a God, first, in order to say that you don't believe that there's a God, you have to admit that there's a God somewhere not to believe in, which I never,
Right.
but, yeah. But for those people who are people of, who are religious people, there's not the same sort of boundary there. It's like we can't offend any other ethnicity or color or race or anything else, but we sure can offend religious people. And why would we do that? Why do you think that standard exists still?
They call it being a conspiracy theorist, but I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. And I can be called a conspiracy theorist. It won't hurt my feelings at all, because I probably am. But I truly do believe that many musical artists, movie stars, politicians, in many ways, and it may just be rhetorical, but it most definitely is spiritual, that they sell their soul to Satan to get fame and fortune. They sign their life away to achieve a status in this world that doesn't give them any spiritual fulfillment, that brings them closer to this world and of the flesh than it does to God. And call me a conspiracy theorist, but I can see when there is a movie star or a musical artist who professes their faith in Christ, they either get canceled and you don't hear from them anymore, or something about them changes and you start seeing them do those things that you were saying about, well, you really didn't. That was more of a different example, but you start seeing them do more provocative things, changing their gender or doing sexual things or perverse things in music videos or in movies, saying terrible things. And you're like, why did they change? I thought they were this way. And I believe it is just a flesh thing, a desire to be famous, a
I
desire
do
to
agree
have
that I
that.
think I do agree that I think it's exploitive, because if you have somebody that has a certain moral conviction and you're going, okay, well, there's boundaries you can't cross. So there are certain ways that I'm just not going to be able to exploit you. But if you reject all that stuff, then I can use you in any way, and you're just the person I want. And I'm going to tell you, you're a great star, and you're a good dancer, and you're going to do everything, and you're going to make it far. But really, all I'm doing is making my money off your back, and I'm exploiting you. I'm
Yeah.
using, yeah. And they're like, oh, please exploit me. And I'm
Yes.
like, yeah, no, thank you. Even when I used to do entertainment for work for a living, it was one of those deals where people would ask me, my friends back in the day, because I mean, when we were all growing up and we all started playing guitar and this, that, and the other, and we're like, hey man, one day we'll be famous. And I'm like, yeah, no, I have absolutely no desire to be famous. None. I don't want to be famous. I don't care. Um, I like being able to have a certain amount of anonymity. I don't want people that know who I am everywhere I go.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't want, I mean, I don't need all that, you know. To me, that's so much of a hassle.
Mhm.
And you read about these people that are very famous, that are known globally because either they've been in a number of acclaimed films, or they have a musical career that is so well known that they're known on multiple continents and all this. They're not just like your local hero or play actor down here at the local house or arts council or something.
Mhm.
Um, and you hear all the, they have stalkers, and they have hate mail and threatening mail, and as much as sometimes or more than their fan mail, which could be voluminous. They have all kinds of this stuff going on, and the next thing you know, they're buying these big mansions, and they're putting walls around themselves, and they're shutting themselves off, and they're isolating more and more and more and more and more and more and more, and they're no longer free. They're
Yes.
trapped. They're trapped by their own fame and
Mhm.
all that. And I'm like, why in the world would you subject yourself to that? Might as well just go down to the local prison and just enroll and say, give me a cell by myself. You know what I mean? That's crazy to me to want that,
Mhm.
to be so isolated. Um, yeah, I don't understand why people. I really don't understand why people chase that, because that's kind of how I view that. I'm like, ultimately, every time I watch every example that I've seen of this, it ultimately leads to isolation, and usually to depression and substance abuse of some sort.
Yes.
It turns into this snowball that eats away their life. And yeah, no, you can have it.
Mhm.
You can have it. I'm good.
Yeah.
Um, and it, I talk about a lot of these topics. Um, Although I wish sometimes I had gone deeper in some of these areas, but I talk about a lot of these topics in my book, Christianity Untried. And I try to outline um, the aspects of our faith. I mean, I guess when I wrote that, I wasn't consciously aware of the fact that I was pretty much writing a, a theology book for laypersons, really,
Mhm.
ultimately. Um, but that's kind of what it is. Um, but I was very well aware that all of these people that I meet, and it's not just like it's not a denominational thing. It's not like, well, all the Baptists feel like they're being slighted. No, it's Christians in general.
Yeah.
They all feel like their values, their morality, their ethics, and quite frankly, their God is being attacked by culture.
Mhm.
In a world where every other faith seems to be accepted and, well, no, oh, you're Buddhist? Well, how cool is that? Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Oh, you're Rastafarian? That's very interesting. Let's talk about that. Oh, you're Christian? Yeah. Take your Jesus away from here.
Oh, and
It
Christians are
feels
attacked
so
so much for
isolated.
that. They'll
Go ahead.
they'll they'll say that Jesus is, well, Christians deserve it because, you know, we've started wars, we've killed people for our faith. We follow all of these strict rules and we demand people follow them too. We cast people aside who aren't like us. And there it almost seems like it's those who have rejected God, those on the outside who will make the claim on who we are, who Christians are, and will make that basis. Well, this is what you believe when it's no, that's not it. That's a total exaggeration of what Christianity is supposed to be.
Well, I mean, and this whole thing about the fighting and stuff, Christians wars, and I'm like, okay, so you're going to tell me you've never heard of an Islamic warrior, or
Hmm.
a warrior of any other religious? Really? No, I mean, there's been people of every religion, every one of them, that have gone to war, been fighting against something or whatever physically in a war.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I don't, yeah, but so if you know that that's the case, and you know that this is, you can make that same claim about things other than Christianity, then why single Christianity out?
Simply because I think, spiritually speaking, everyone has that God-shaped hole in their heart. We've talked about this before. And if they refuse to fill it with the one true God, then they have got to find a way to reject him. They've got to find something else to cling to. They have got to find a reason for not wanting God. And people will cling to whatever belief structure or idealism that seems to set them free in their mind, on their flesh, to separate themselves from Christianity. You know, here's an example, and this might be a bad example, but this is kind of what comes to mind is when you have somebody who, okay, again, this may be a bad example because it's going to start off bad, but a couple breaks up, but one of them really still loves the other, but the other is living their life. They're fine. Everything is going smooth. And so the one who is still has those feelings begins to have that resentment and that anger and that jealousy, but they refuse to admit that that's what it is. And so they will, in their mind, make up all kinds of excuses and will call that person all kinds of names and will say, well, this person has done this wrong, that wrong. They've done me wrong. They're going to do wrong again. I I hate them. But really it's more of a, I'm mad that they don't love me like I've loved them. And I believe that many people who have rejected God have that same ideal towards God. It's a resentment. It's a jealous anger. It's a, where spiritually they are supposed to love God, but they can't allow themselves to do that.
Okay, you lost me a little bit. So let me see if I can try to understand what you're saying. So you're not saying that they're mad because they feel God doesn't love them the way they love God.
Mm-mm. No, I'm saying that they have, how can I say this? It's more of a, they don't want to love God. They don't want to acknowledge God's existence.
Because
And they just don't want to. But they've got that hole in their heart, as we all do, that is only to be filled with the love of our Creator. We are all made to love God. Since God created us, we are a part of Him. But
so
those who have been swayed by the evil one, by society, those who have rejected God, they've got to find a reason
I
to
would I
reject
would
God.
chalk that up to pride, because in order for you to accept who God is and who you are and what that relationship really is, you have to accept that God is the one that's sovereign.
Yeah.
And so you I think if there's somebody that there's I just don't want to acknowledge God, it's that I don't want somebody to have power over me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I believe this whole thing, this whole the abortion argument. I don't agree with abortion.
Right.
And I do think that the argument itself comes from a place of satanic thinking. Right before Jesus Christ was all man and all God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. God entered into his creation in the form of a human flesh and a human body, and he chose to enter his creation through the womb. That's how he chose to enter.
Mm-hmm.
And then right before he was to be crucified, he told his disciples, "This is my body broken for you." And there's no coincidence that the words used, "my body, my choice."
Yeah.
There's no coincidence that those words are the words being used, because
Yes.
Jesus is saying, "This is my body," and they're saying, "This is my body," and they're saying, "You can't tell me what to do." Blah, 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 blah. See, they're rejecting his authority, his um, autonomy. Well, autonomy is not the word I was looking for, but his sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
They're rejecting it as you can't tell me, because they don't want to submit to his authority. And that's the biggest problem with all of us. And see, um, when we talk about this personality, Satan, it says he was pure and righteous until iniquity was found in him. Right? That iniquity that rose up in him was pride, and it's the seed that starts in all of us. Okay, and when we become prideful, um, we start to rebel against humility and humbleness. We don't want to be humbled, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and even by other people. We see being humble as an insult. We see humility as a weakness. Man, you can't let him dog you out like that, man. You know, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
You don't be no chump. You know what I'm saying? And we see it as, and so we try to show ourselves as being somehow strong, or try to flex or whatever. And never once realizing that you look like a banny rooster strutting around a farmyard. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. you know. Um well, this has been a good conversation. I don't know. I mean, I get the feeling that we could keep going, but I also get the feeling that if we did, we would basically be deriving the same conclusions and sort of rehashing the same undergirding argument for everything that we've discussed. Um, I do want to take a moment. I mentioned earlier that during the podcast that I had written a book called Christianity Untried, and the books are available if you want to get them. You can get them through Barnes and Noble, and I'll put them on the screen so that you can actually see the covers. This is on the screen right now is Christianity Untried, and the newest one that's out is a book on building disciples, and it's called Christianity Realized: Blueprints for Building Disciples. And so it's more of a book geared toward people that want to strengthen discipleship, not only in themselves but in their church and in their community and all that. So, is there anything that in some ways I feel like I've dominated this conversation. I'll try to give you ample time to speak. Um, but is there anything that you wanted to touch on, that you wanted to address, that we haven't? Anything that like comes to your mind?
No, just a simple summary. Just something that I want Christians to hear, the Christians that are watching the podcast, don't ever be ashamed of your faith, but be willing to talk about it with people who may disagree with you and listen. But by all means, please try to understand your faith before you feel like you have to defend it. You know, if you feel backed into a corner because your beliefs are being attacked, because your ideals are not well represented in our world, take a step back, take a breath, realize that God is for you. The victory's already been won. You do not have to win a fight because Jesus has already won that fight. And our job now is just to spread the good news and to spread truth. And that's what we as Christians need to be focused on. Just spreading the truth. Let's correct what has been misspoken about us. Most definitely. And let's do it in a loving manner.
Well, and yeah, now I will say this. On the complete reverse end of the spectrum, we've been talking about how sometimes Christians feel like they're trying to be canceled or they're being attacked just simply for being Christians, and it seems to be increasing in our culture. I will also say that there are some Christians that are so what's the word, aggressive with their delivery and um, their example of trying to communicate their faith, that they make themselves unapproachable and they make themselves to be at least appear to be somebody that people who don't know anything about Christianity would not want to interchange with. You know, I don't want to dialogue with you because you're too aggressive, you're too affronting, and we've got to remember that the reason that we do everything that we do is because we love people. I'm not here to fight you. I don't want to fight you. I'm here to talk with you, share my viewpoint with you, and we've got to get to this point of understanding. If somebody looks me in the face and says, "You know, Randy, I've heard everything that you say. I disagree." You know what? Okay.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: I'm not gonna hate you for it. I'm not gonna fight you because of it. I'm not going to. I'm still going to love you the same way that I love you right now. I'm just going to realize you don't agree with what I agree with. And that's it. And that's really the truth of the matter. We can still go and get a burger and watch a film and, go fishing or something. That's fine. I'm all right with that. We've got to stop. We've got to stop being so nasty to each other. That's it,
Yeah.
man. Well, awesome. Hey, for those people who watch our videos, or most people that listen to our podcast, listen to the audio, we're very grateful that you listen to us. We're very grateful that you subscribe and tune in, and please share the podcast with your friends and all those that you think it would benefit. We'd love for more people to listen to us and hear our messages and everything, but most importantly than that, what we're about is Christian conversation. So we advocate that you read your Bible and that you are informed about your faith, and please join the conversation in your area. Get to talking about all these things and do it in a very loving and respectful way. But don't shy away from it. I mean, that's live your faith out loud. Live out loud. We love that. And thank you once again for listening to us. We want you happy, we want you blessed, and we want you in the forge.